Welcome, everybody, to episode 71. Today, we're going to talk about failure, because everyone is a failure. Or rather, everyone at some point is going to fail, whether takes the form of dying in battle repeatedly, losing your team, losing a fight, losing your keep, your side, and your faction in a server always being kind of the underdog and never really quite being able to get a leg up. Whatever form that failure takes place in, we're going to talk about a lot of different ones, and not so much what you can do to make failure not a problem, because you fail, you lose, there should be impact for that, but how to make the game still enjoyable even if you're losing, even if you're on the losing side, how do you still have fun? So, it is, I want to start with death, and I should note that today I just have Bram with me. Chris is hanging out in the chat box because he's sick, so he's going to type away and add some comments and stuff, along with everybody else that's hanging out today. But I do want to start with death, because death is the most common form of failure in the game. I mean, you're going to get in battles, you're going to repeatedly run out into a field and get stabbed and die. And especially when they're talking about adding a real impact to death in the game, that being that at least some of the time or all the time or however they decide to do it, because they still haven't really told us how resurrection is going to work. However they do it, there's going to be some element of travel time involved, at least at some point. So dying is kind of a problem. And so they obviously can't have you just getting immediately slaughtered and having to spend all your playtime walking back, because no one would play the game. Everyone would say, fuck this, and we're not doing it. So, the real question is, how do they keep the game still enjoyable in light of wanting to make death actually meaningful?
It's a great question. It's a very difficult one to answer, I think. In any setting like this, the resolution to failure is succeeding, and if you're constantly failing, how does that become fun? How do they make it fun when you're not considering actually like not failing at that point? If success is the true way to determine that you're going to have fun, how do you create something where you're still going to fail repeatedly but have fun failing? This seems very hard to answer and almost contradictory.
Yeah, I can say, like, looking at the comments already for Sacrix's comments, I can agree that losing should not be rewarded. Obviously, if you're dying, you shouldn't necessarily be rewarded for that. Now, I would say with the horizontal progression system, obviously you're still fighting, so you're still going to have some sort of character progression for that. But if you're losing the fight, you shouldn't necessarily be given a reward for that. I don't agree with. He seems to be suggesting that. You need to be able to come back to a fight within 30 seconds to a minute. I definitely don't agree with that. As we've covered repeatedly, I'm a little bit of a hardliner on this. I want there to be a long delay of travel time and stuff. Maybe not every single time you die, but I would definitely like it to be a recurring theme of having to, get back into the fight, and death actually being meaningful. I'm kind of sick of these MMOs where you die and you respawn 10 seconds later and run, or 30 seconds later, and you run back up in the fight, and it's just a continual process of slamming yourselves into each other until one side manages to prevail.
Yeah. I think that the balance of the fight itself will play some portion or part in making dying not this huge headache. If you're in an 8-man versus 8-man scenario and it comes down to the wire as a fight, that is enjoyable. That's fun, knowing that you got that close. You weren't just steamrolled over. It wasn't an easy fight to lose or an easy fight to win. There was actual competitiveness there. And when you die in that environment, it's very full of anxiety, but it's also fun.
Yeah, Donnie brings up a good point that, and Sacker said that's not what he meant. He was more referring to death penalties. I actually don't want any kind of a death penalty. I don't think that you come back to life, you should have a death penalty. I don't think there should be any. I think that having to travel back to the battle is enough death penalty. But Donnie brought up a good point of, some of the abilities we have compared to other MMOs are just more fun. So I actually agree that that'll help, and I think that's probably a good part of what they can do to make it so that even when you're dying, you're still having fun in the game. Because if the combat is fun, then yeah, dying still sucks, but you at least have fun while you're doing the combat. It's engaging and it's interesting. And so to me, that just means now they've said that there's going to be a longer time to kill in this game than in other games. And to me, that's
Hmm.
really where one of the areas they can capitalize on this is if they can truly make it so that people don't die quickly. They don't drop in 30 seconds of walking on the battlefield, which is going to be a difficult thing to balance because how do you balance that and people make it so that people do still die, but they can't be one-shotted by 2 or 3 people at once, and so on and so forth. But I feel like if the combat itself is fun, and you can at least have a decent prolonged period of fighting back and forth before you drop, then having some kind of a not like a death penalty in that you have a debuff, but having to walk back some of the time or things of that nature, it doesn't, that doesn't suck as bad because then you get to go, oh, well, I had this really cool fight where we were casting spells back and forth and we were doing wind wall and all this stuff. And then I finally died. That sucks. But now I'm going to go back and do something different.
Yeah, I think that's kind of key there too, with getting back into the fight and having that time frame of continued prolonged fighting before you die again. Just getting there and going down and then having to run 2 minutes back and getting there and going down and then having to run 2 minutes back is not going to be fun. If you can react to your death, come back and still have a prolonged play session before you die again, I think that'll curb some of
Well,
that frustration.
and I really think having the longer time to kill, as Chris says, it helps you learn your weaknesses of your class and strength of your enemy. It also helps with things like, ears and other systems that are adding levels of detail to the combat. If the combat does take longer, there's more of these things that you have time to actually notice in a fight instead of just looking at somebody and going, okay, mash button, mash button, mash button, mash button, like you do in most MMOs. You do have a little bit more time in that case to actually kind of plot out what you're doing and maybe get an idea of what your enemies have been doing and what they're doing now. And, to have more counterplay that can make the combat more interesting. One of the other things that I thought of that was similar to an earlier comment is, fighting somebody and then dying sucks because dying just always sucks. But it would be interesting, I think, if you could still perhaps get some kind of a notification if the person who killed you dies within a certain time, um, or maybe the last person you were hitting dies within a certain time of you fighting them or you dying, just so that you kind of get like almost like a vengeance notification. Like, so if you're hitting somebody and you get them down to like 10% of their health and then you die, instead of just being like, I'm dead, well, that sucked, you die, and then while you're waiting to respawn, you suddenly get a little pop-up that's like blah 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 killed the X person
Yeah,
who killed you, and then you can go, haha, we did get him.
so and so has avenged you.
Exactly.
And
You can go, oh, okay, cool. I died, but that guy at least died too because I took him down a lot.
that's a nice little way of providing a mental reward and not an in-game reward.
Yeah, just kind of a reminder that, oh, you actually did something. You didn't just die. You did actually accomplish something, um, or at least help accomplish something. I think somebody had commented on seeing stuff about how you die, and I think that would be good too. Like getting the death recap. Um, I missed who had said it because I think this chat scrolled by now, but having the actual death recap so you can see you can, I guess, assess what you did and what went wrong and what abilities dealt the most damage to you and all that kind of stuff to help, so you can frame it in, I guess, a positive light. Okay, where did this go wrong and how can I improve it for the next fight?
Yeah. Going off of that vengeance idea, it'd be nice if when you res up, there was some sort of system even that allowed you to get credit for your death. You res back up, you kill the person who killed you, and then the
Yeah.
same type of message pops up like you have avenged yourself or you have retribution
kind of an automatic, like, kind of like the bounty system, but like an automatic like micro bounty. Someone kills you, you get like a little vengeance bounty for them. Like, I want to get you, and I know I'll
Yeah.
get bonus stuff if I kill you. So maybe you get a reward in the future if you can track that person down and kill them on the field. Probably a small one, but just a little
Sure.
incentive to or at the very least, like a little marker or something on them. So when you get back on the field, you go, oh, there's that bastard. Of course, as it is now, it's kind of hard to see people at distance anyway and tell who's who. But, that's got to be worked out. Let's see. There's a lot of stuff going on in chat here. I do think death curses actually do help with that too, as Chris was saying. The concept of death curses, even if they're low chance of happening, but having something cool that happens occasionally when you die, could be kind of a cool thing to happen, because then you're like, I'm dead. Oh God, I just blew up everybody. That's awesome.
Yeah, if those manage to make it in the game,
Yeah.
as both death curses and the divine intervention are not part of the current class ability system or classes for beta whatsoever.
I actually like Bao Bao's suggestion, having the opposite of titles, where they suggest your weaknesses. It's the 100th time you've died by fire. I like that. That would be interesting. That would actually be interesting to at least have on the stat sheet or something. Just some. The top thing that kills you is fire damage. Bear that in mind. It's going to say that in a if you go through the charts anyway, but it would be interesting to
Right.
have like a almost achievement style list of things like, wow, you've taken 10 million fire damage. Good job. Or maybe stop standing in fire. One of the two, however you want to take that.
Oh, Grimm's lag.
Yeah, that's a good point, Grimslag. That they are adding the tallying your rewarded contribution added to deaths for tallying killing blows and stuff, and that's important. Kind of goes with that that concept of the vengeance notification of someone killing you and then you getting notified when they die, or if you're fighting someone and they get killed right after. Having some kind of indicator of that you're actually contributing.
I want to say I heard at some point that there was going to be some sort of visual to show who your Nemesis is in the game, like the person who has killed you the most in this entire game.
Yeah, I feel like that was a thing at some point for sure. I feel like that was one of those things that was suggested as a thing they were going to do a long time ago. I don't know if that's still a thing or not, but there's a lot of things like that was definitely a thing at one point. May still be a thing. I do really like tombstones and stuff in games. I think in something like this is problematic where we have tons of people in the field, unless they can set it up so like it only shows yours to you or something, like, oh, that's where I died, but some kind of a subtle marker or something. But
what are your thoughts on having some sort of like cam system, a death cam system, where when you're dead waiting to res, you can follow people within your group kind of behind them and maybe provide any kind of tactical visual information that you're seeing that maybe they're not seeing?
That's kind of like, I like the idea, depending on how resurrection's done and coming back to life and all that stuff. Personally, I don't. We've talked about this before. I don't like the idea of having battlefield resurrection, or at least don't. I want it very highly restricted if there is one. So I actually don't like the idea of people staying on the field dead for a long time. I would rather someone instantly respawns, but respawns back at a keep and have to walk back, than sit there and be like, I'm dead, waiting for respawn. But if there is some kind of battlefield res or stuff like that, or there's downtime for some other reason, then it would be cool to have a cam to follow your allies. I don't know that it would be useful tactically. Maybe for smaller groups, it might be useful. I'm just picturing like bigger groups now, and then someone dies and they're like, "Hey guys, I can see everything," and they're all like, "Shut up." Like in the groups we run, we wouldn't be very happy if somebody died and then started trying to tell us what was going on around us. We'd just be like, "Dude, shut up. Keep comms clear. What are you doing?" If it's like an 8-man group or something, that might be more manageable. But if you're trying to run like a whole raid of people, depending on how you're organized, and how you've got all the groups set up. But I don't know.
What about death puzzles? When you die, in order to come back, you have to perform a puzzle.
Oh god, there's some people would hate that so much.
Just trying to think of things you can do while you're dead that will make being dead a little less painful.
Like I said, I'm hopeful that there won't be a lot of time period of you just laying around dead, and that's part of the issue I have with Battlefield Res is instead of I get that people are like, I don't want to have to walk back to the battlefield and yada yada yada. But instead of that, how much time do people spend laying on the field waiting for someone to resurrect them instead of just walking the hell back to the fight? I've had in Warhammer, I had numerous battles where I would die and then just lay there on the stairs of a keep, going like, "Is someone gonna res me, guys? Is anyone gonna res me?" Yep. If I cap the keep, we'll just respawn. I guess I could do that and respawn here, and I'll just wait for like 10 minutes. When it's like, you could have just respawned already and started walking back. I'd rather walk back than just lay there on the ground and watch people run over my dead body. That's just me. I actually don't mind people being able to see the battle if they are, if we are playing a game and they're laying on the field dead, waiting for respawn or however respawn's going to work. I don't mind them being able to see what's going on around them as long as they don't have like, I don't think it has any kind of a balance issue if they don't have a camera that's panning around, because if they're on the ground dead, then most likely that area has already been taken, and they're not like seeing things from their allies' perspectives. They're probably just laying there, staring up the kilts of all the TDD, going, "Ugh."
Yeah, the auto respawn is, kind of like a Warzone mechanic in that style, a vein of respawn. You saw it in World of Warcraft, Battlegrounds, and any kind of battleground, really.
Yeah. I mean, like I've said, personally, I'd rather you just respawn to the nearest uncontested keep and then have to walk back. And if people build keeps too far apart, well, then your realm shouldn't have freaking done that. That, or you're pushing way too far out from where your keeps are. But unfortunately, we really don't know. We really just don't know what they're going to do with res. So it does make it kind of difficult to speculate on some of these things. One of the things that's similar to this that I did want to discuss a little bit is persistent realm unbalance, because that tends to make you die a lot. And that is definitely a problem. Now, they've kind of suggested that they're going to, work on that by providing incentives to the underdog realms. If there's fewer people in your realm, then you'll get more like crafting resources and things like that to try and offset the balance, or at least make you have some benefit to being the underdog. But that doesn't really necessarily help make the game more fun.
No, and an imbalance in realm contributes to failing in so many other ways as well, not just more death to you, but preventing resources, your acquirement of those resources, building things. It really kind of stymies the whole progression of these elements.
Though it steps back, I do like the idea of being able to haunt someone who killed me. That's pretty funny. Um, but yeah, and honestly, it's Realm Unbalance is a very tough subject because there is a limited amount of things they can do. Every MMO, every PvP and RVR MMO has tried to balance this out, and to a certain degree, you can't. There's only so much that they
Yeah.
can do, and a lot of games have tried different methods, and I don't know that any of them have really worked very well. One thing I thought of that I think might be interesting is, if because we don't really know that there will be, but if there are any sort of and they've kind of suggested that they don't particularly want to have these so much, as I recall. But if there are any sort of like realm objectives, where the NPCs of the realm lay out some bounties or objectives that maybe give extra reward or something, one thing they could do is try to have something like that for the underdog realms, uh, in that, but specifically to highlight, I guess, goals that should be more easily achievable with fewer people. So instead of, our achievement is go take that keep. Well, you're not going to take that keep. The other realm has twice the number of people you have. There's no way you're going to be able to take that keep. But maybe there are other resources or things that you can focus on and claim that are still achievable. Now, to some degree, those should be player driven, but so should other things in other MMOs, and the players don't tend to
Right.
drive it, and they just switch servers. So
It's typically what happens. Yeah.
it is a tough thing,
It's
though, because it's
aside from having the numbers, like looking at servers and trying to coerce people to transfer to an underpopulated server, um, you really have to give mechanical and number incentives to the underpopulated realm, increase their stats a little bit, boost something to give them an edge, or they're just never going to perform.
Yeah, the one thing that I have seen, a number of MMOs do give an enhancement to the underdog realm to try to even the scales, and honestly, I hate it. Uh, I don't think it really works either, and it just leads to just tons of bitching and complaining from people of just going, oh, they got a 5% damage bonus now because they're smaller than us, and
Yeah.
I'm at least glad that they've more or less said, they're not doing that. They're going to try
Right.
to balance it through other means.
I think it all kind of just starts with your server count. We've seen a lot of MMOs open too many servers at once.
Yes.
Conversely, we've seen a lot of MMOs start with too few, and then you have super long waits to get in, and they're very slow at adding more. So there's a number there that they can probably work with to have maybe just enough or just under enough to keep them full.
Absolutely. And this is where I wish I wish the technology for single server MMOs worked in more games, and was, that we had that tech to be able to do that in more MMOs. We don't, but that's where, like, a lot of conversations have gone on for ages about different servers, about having, servers for different time zones, servers for different geographic locations, and to some extent we're going to have servers for those different areas and things like that, RP servers and so on and so forth. But honestly, like, with the amount of people that are on each server, and then this game being somewhat more of a niche MMO, I don't see them having that many servers. Like, I don't see there being that much drive to have, 15 different servers. Is there really going to be a player base for that? I highly doubt it. I think we're talking about a couple of servers. And having it more, as you said, having it more concentrated like that will help prevent having a huge problem with one side being the underdog. Certainly, there's always going to be an underdog side that's a little bit smaller, but I think the goal is for them to not be way smaller than any other realm.
Right.
And
if you can have each realm at least add a player cap for that realm on that server or close to it, that would at least be the best potential for a balance there.
I don't. I might be okay with something like a founder server or something if it was temporary. Like, you know, it starts off that way for like the first week or something, and then it opens up. But um, as a permanent type thing, that would just drain all recruitment from every guild as everyone leaves. Um, as half the people 1 year in decide they're tired of the game. So another thing I wanted to talk about with regards to loss and failure is siege, because not only dying kind of sucks, and having a smaller realm kind of sucks, depending on how small you are. If you're a little bit small, it can be fun, and because it's a challenge. But if you're way too small, that sucks.
Hmm.
Siege, like the game's not going to be only siege battles, but a siege is an investment. You're going to have to put a lot of time and energy and resources into a proper siege, whether you're attacking or defending. And so getting invested into that, spending an hour or 2 hours sieging a keep and then losing can be particularly disappointing and discouraging depending on how that goes about. So that was another thing I want to talk about is what they can do to help keep things fun and less discouraging when you do fail in a siege, whether you're attacking or defending, especially given that the rewards you get in the game are delayed. So you can't even be in the fight in the middle of the siege. You go,
Right.
I leveled. You're not getting any rewards till the end of the day. So, and people
Again,
like their cookies.
very tough. Yeah, they do. And they don't like losing their cookies either.
No.
Um,
One thing that I have that actually kind of goes a little bit into the time to kill thing that we discussed for death
mhm.
is I feel like they should kind of try to focus on the flow of the battle a little bit and focus on things with keep and building mechanics. And I don't necessarily have any great solutions on how they do this, but try to focus on the flow of battle. And, uh, so one of the things that I see in games that have sieges is you just surge through. Once you break that final barrier, once you smash through the outer wall and your army surges in, you start killing people and you just blow past defenses. You charge straight through straight up the stairs and you cap the keep and everyone dies and you're just like, we took it. So you spend like an hour PV dooring and trying to get inside. Then you get inside, you overwhelm everybody and just smash the whole thing. And I feel like that tends to not be very fun, at least for me, because I'm like, oh, I got in, and now we finally have victory, and now everything is dead. Or if you're the defender, you're like, they're getting through the walls, they broke through the wall, and we're all dead. Instead, having it so that there are pauses, there are places where, okay, they can succeed, and even if you're losing, maybe you have a point where you can rally and try to at least, even if you can already tell, okay, we're not going to win this, maybe you can at least push them back or hold them back for a while and feel like, okay, we achieved something. We at least
Right.
held them back for a while. We gave it a good fight instead of just getting wiped out of the castle.
Yeah, that would certainly help. I think being able to reclaim something of what you lost will help curb some of the frustration of losing a keep or losing a siege as well. If you do die and you manage to get back to what was your keep, maybe it's been largely destroyed, you can maybe reclaim some of the resources from it to take back with you to the next point of defense.
One thing that I think might be interesting for them to explore, especially as we know that larger castles will have like some types of upgrades and things, is the Planet Side 2 model, where you couldn't just take a castle, invade into the middle of the castle, and then you win the castle. That's not how you cap bases. You had to
Hmm.
take different parts of the base. You had to go in. You could invade through the wall, but then you had to go capture this one area in order to diminish the power of the base or drop
Right.
shields or whatever, and then you go to another part. I actually think the problem, maybe part of the issue with PlanetSide 2 is they had too much of it. Like it's a good idea, but maybe they had too much of it. So you get in the castle now, it's like, okay, I can either do this and this and this or this or this. So then everyone gets spread out and they start making smaller fights all over the place. Um, I don't know if it was necessarily like it was too much, but I feel like in Camelot Unchained that would be too much. But maybe once you break through the castle, you can't just necessarily surge right into the middle and go, "We take the castle." Instead, you get in and then you're like, "Okay, we need to at least do this." And then we take the keep or something. So then the defenders can go, okay, they're breaking the wall. Well, let's rally our defense here. So we have to hold this point. So then you can go group up and you hold it. They go and eventually take it from you, and then you fall back to the center of the keep and the cat flag or whatever they have to cap. But just so that there is a little bit of back and forth where, okay, the situation of the battle has changed. We're now switching around and doing something different.
Hmm.
Maybe that gives us a better context to fight than, oh, they plowed through the wall and now we fall back to the inner keep, and that's literally the only thing we do in every castle fight.
Yeah, and they kind of had that in ESO as well, where you had like the three outer farms that then reduced certain elements of the main keep that made it easier to take.
That just
Um,
wasn't very useful.
right. It didn't actually play a huge role in
Yeah.
directing or funneling any kind of defense or attack. It was very quick to happen, and there was really no getting there to prevent it if you were nearby. But I like the idea of funneling stages into different elements to help make a push either easier for the attackers or for the defenders to give them a point of focus to work at defending.
Yeah, and I'm like I said, I don't know that I don't have any great solutions on how they could do it, but I feel like maybe there are some options there in how they organize keep building and stuff to make that have some more variation on how siege battles go about. Um,
I feel like as a defender, if you're capable of withstanding a siege, even for a longer period of time, knowing that it's probably going to get taken sooner or
mhm.
later, if you can make it later, you've done your part and you've had fun, probably doing a lot of cool things to the attackers in the process before it finally gets pushed. And I think it'd be nice to provide means for defenders to really make that difficult for attackers.
Yeah, surely. One thing that kind of with that could be interesting is we've someone had suggested the death recap. Having a siege recap could be interesting, like a personalized one. The castle finally falls, and you get a little thing you can pull up that shows like how many people you killed during the siege. It's like specific to that. How many did you kill during the last like 30 minutes or whatever?
Mhm.
How much damage did you do? Just as a kind of a like, okay, the castle fell, but you killed like 40 people. So you can go, cool. Yeah, I killed like 40 people. Um, because I know, like, especially in like a siege battle, it can be very impersonal, at least for me. So you get in the castle, you're firing catapults and so on and so forth, and you're killing people. And it's like, yeah, I killed people, but then by the time the hour-long siege is over, you're like, I have no idea how many people I killed. I don't
Right.
know. They're all just ants running around shooting at me, and I'm pelting them from the walls.
I think it was ESO had the little lava buckets you can pour over the
Those were great.
wall. Those were fun.
I did enjoy stuff like that. Just sitting there and just be
Yeah.
like,
Things like that. Being able to build uh maybe some makeshift moats or bridges that could collapse if you destroy them yourselves or things like that would fun.
placing traps again to
Yeah.
change up the flow of battle. They break out the wall and then they come in, and you've got a bunch of melee people, a bunch of heavy fighters standing there, and you've planted traps all behind the wall where they're breaking through. So they come through, got hit by all these traps, and your heavy fighters charge in and start and push them back out of the keep. You're still going to lose, but you at least push them back out the wall, and you're like, ha, we did something.
Yeah, if depending on what the trap was, if there was just a really cool moment where your idea worked and you die, 10 minutes later, but you had
Mhm.
fun making sure that idea worked and you took 10 people with you and you can laugh at them in the process. And
Uh, the
that's
uh,
more fun than not.
Another thing I thought of for keeps is it would be interesting to me um, if player keeps had some sort of a history or like ledger of achievements. So like for instance, it could have like a record somewhere that's posted within the keep that people could click on. It could go, okay, this who built the keep. This is who
Hmm.
built it. Who currently owns the keep. Who has historically owned the keep. Um, who has owned the keep the longest. And it could have things like what is the longest defense of the keep. So,
Right.
like during a siege, like what was the longest period of time someone has actively fought and successfully defended the keep, or how long it was the long, things like that that could just show up. So then, historically, anybody could come back to that keep later on and click on it and be like, "All right, what was the longest period someone has held this castle for?" Wow, somebody held this for like a 3-hour fight at some point, and then you would go like it's like we're trying to we're gonna lose, but we've at least held the castle for a long period of time, and maybe that will be a thing worthy of remembrance.
Yeah. Yeah. You could, at that point, uh, just mentally kind of draws people like, let's keep this achievement going. Let's forget that other keep. It's only been up for a couple days. Let's go defend this keep to keep it going because it's that keep. It's the special one.
I did play Planet Side. I played Planet Side quite a bit. Especially Planet Side 1. I did not play Planet Side 2 as much as 1, but I did play both a fair bit.
And
Yeah,
that's
all I remember from PlanetSide though was going to sleep and waking up, and all of our keeps have been recaptured. That was generally what I remember, and it was
yeah,
annoying as
that's
crap. And that was
an
going to be my
element of
next
failure too.
my next topic is losing your keep when you're asleep and you're not even
Yeah,
on to defend it.
that's the
Which
worst kind of failure. I wasn't even there to fail, and I failed.
which we had a whole episode about this, but so I don't want to belabor it too much, but obviously, I think the key thing here is to make sure that doesn't happen too easily.
Yeah.
Because we don't want to keep swapping every night because of nightcaps. Um,
There's so many balance issues with this topic.
there really is. I was trying to look. There's there are a few things that we have kind of touched on before. Like I think that if it's easier within a certain time period for the original owner of the keep or the last like real owner of the keep to recap it, say within a certain time span, that doesn't make it more fun, but it can help soften the
Mhm.
blow of logging on and being like,
Sure.
oh, we got to go recap our keep again.
Yeah. There's got to be some form of retaliation. I won't say timer, but some period of time where if a keep is taken, you, as the original owners of it, have a chance to retaliate and claim it. And should you fail, then it goes to the other team. And that timer needs to be long enough to go through a night cycle or an afternoon cycle of 8 to 12
Yeah.
hours.
Well, that's kind of what I'm thinking is one, taking a keep will just take a while anyway. But then after you claim someone else's keep, maybe there should be a period of time of like 24 hours or something where it's not you've captured it, but it's not yours. It's still
Right.
kind of theirs. And if they reclaim it, it like immediately goes back under their full control. But if they take more than like 24 hours or whatever the time period is, that where it's easier for them to reclaim it, then
Hmm.
the ownership does truly switch to you, and it's like, all right, well, they took too long, they couldn't muster the forces, whatever, so it's not theirs anymore.
Right.
Um, the other thing I thought of is a kind of a similar vein to some of the other things we talked about with death and things like that is a vengeance notification. Um, or rather in this case a sneak attack notification. Maybe if someone does take a keep that is largely undefended, then the next time you log on, if say like your guild or somebody owned that keep, the next time you log on, you get a vengeance notification. It's like your keep was taken. These are the people who took your keep. And now you have like a little miniature vengeance bounty against them or something, so that the next time you kill those people, you get like an extra, renown reward or something for the realm. Basically for them having taken your keep and as it night capped it in the middle of the night, and you can go, I know who did it, and I'm gonna get you. It's just kind of a pride thing a little bit, but a little bit of renown reward where you can go, okay, I know who took my keep in the middle of the night, and I'm gonna find you and kill you at some point. I do also tend to agree, Grim Slag. I think that the major keeps, the really big keeps that guilds put up and everything and really invest a lot of resources into, should be really hard to take. They should not fall and switch ownership very regularly. It's mostly going to be smaller keeps, and those, if they switch ownership, it's not that big of a deal. It's like, I mean, it's a little fort. It's going to be taken. They've got to figure out how they're going to balance all that, of course, but
yeah, especially when siege engines come into play and figuring out how much damage they do versus wall damage and just the balance of numbers there. Compared to time needed to prevent a nightcap is going to be a headache.
Yeah, and to a certain extent, that's kind of the thing is that we really haven't talked about too much, but I feel like siege weapons or certain siege weapons should be expensive. Because I'm assuming that repairing a keep is probably going to be fairly expensive. So shouldn't the thing that destroys it also be fairly expensive? Not nearly as expensive as the keep, but if you have like 10 trebuchets, those 10 trebuchets I would imagine would be a pretty hefty investment to get there to then pelt the living crap out of a keep. You can maybe recoup that by destroying the keep and salvaging resources from it, but I would think there should be some kind of a cost in that. Unlike other games like TISO, where the siege was like cheap, dirt cheap. It costs nothing to buy and throw down siege. It was like, siege for days.
Yeah, we'd pick up one of each siege type on the way to, or a couple of them on the way to a castle, and use them and pick them up, and go to the next one and use them and pick them up.
Yeah, that was standard policy. If you were in our battle group and you did not have siege, you were in deep shit. We were like, why are you even here? You got to have at least one.
But like if you're preventing a nightcap and you have a team with 5 trebuchets with you, and you're supposed to have this element of no nightcapping, how much damage are those siege actually doing to the wall? Or is the wall just this massive health pool of things that even siege with all of its damage just takes a long time to get through? There's just so many number balancing that it's hard to think about.
Yeah, that's one thing I would like to see to some extent, though, is like siege being actually valuable, or at least like the bigger siege being actually valuable and expensive, but you can repair them. They aren't like walk up and hit it with a torch and it goes up in flame and dies. You can repair it, you can keep it up and everything. You can take it back apart and redeploy it, elsewhere. So then, you can attack a keep and it can still take a while to destroy that keep. But then even the attackers have to defend their siege because they can't really afford to have people just running up and smashing them.
Right.
It doesn't really necessarily rectify nightcaps so much as just being a random tangent I'm going on now. It does kind of go into my last topic, though, of failure that I'd wanted to get into, which is crafting and RNG. We know there's going to be a randomized component to crafting, which implies failure in crafting. In my personal view, if there's going to be RNG in crafting, then obviously I think you should really have 2 choices when it comes to crafting. You can choose to take very little or no risk and just produce a thing you know how to produce, and it comes out fairly reliably. Or high risk, high reward. You can put in high risk, and you might screw up and not produce and fail to produce the thing you want, or you might have a big payoff because you're really putting yourself out there and risking your resources. But that can also potentially open up for some real frustration because I know, like,
Yeah.
for instance, Korean MMOs love the RNG and in crafting, and I never craft in those games. It's always too convoluted. I'm always like, I can't do it. And that's kind of what I'm getting at, Chris, is I think you should have the choice of whether or not you're risking stuff. You should have the choice of whether or not you want to take that risk and try for like a critical success on some kind of crafting thing. Or if you're like, nah, just the +2 sword's good enough. That's what I'm making right now. I don't need to worry about risking my mats.
Yeah, and I mean, and the enjoyment part of that is the reward you potentially get worth the risk. It has to have a
Mm-hmm.
value to it that becomes quantifiable, I guess, and that it means more to whoever's getting it, whether it's you or you're making it for a friend, and that you're okay with losing uh, components involved in it should you fail.
Yeah, and I think that one of the things they had talked about, which I think is important, is make it so that if there is going to be, the chance of critical success and like critical failure, making it so that that is truly impactful. If you're, as you said, if you critically succeed on building something, you either get a new recipe or you make something that is truly, really amazing. And you have just as much likelihood of doing that as critically failing. And for one of the examples I want to say they gave before, doing damage to your Vox and now having to repair
Mhm.
your Vox because you've done something to screw it up. Yeah, and I agree, Chris. I don't think you should have to take risk to produce things that you've made a dozen of. Once
Yeah.
you've reached a certain threshold on something, uh, it just exists. I do kind of feel like there should be things that always require a certain degree of risk. Like if if you get to a tier where you can somewhat consistently try to make epic tier gear, maybe that should always impose some degree of risk. Just because it's always going to be like super amazing. So you can't always guarantee you're going to pull out pull out an Excalibur, but if you're building just okay, my guild needs 10 plus 5 swords, you know, and you've made a dozen of them. You don't need to necessarily roll RNG just to pump out that standard tier of gear that is necessary.
There was it in a SWOTOR, you had the ability to craft an item guaranteed the lowest version of the item, and on RNG chance there were like 2 different levels of it that it could
Mm-hmm.
turn into randomly. And obviously you want the best one as best in slot for what you're using it for, but it doesn't prevent you from making the item as a base level.
Yeah, yeah. Actually, one thing there's 2 things I think they can do here. Um, One is that perhaps critical failure doesn't mean you don't produce the thing. Critical failure is just perhaps if you're taking a risk with RNG, it doesn't mean you don't produce the thing, but instead it's more expensive. So like you invest these materials, and you go to produce it, and you're like, I'm gonna take a risk and try to get a better quality of thing. Maybe if you fail, it still just produces the base level, but it costs extra materials. And if it's like a critical failure, it may do damage to your Vox that you have to then repair. But you still get the item. You just get
Mhm.
the base level of it, and it costs you more materials because you fucked up, basically. As Chris is saying, another option is maybe you get some of your materials back, but not all of them, and you don't get the
Yeah.
item. Um, that's possible too. I kind of like the idea of you still getting the item, but maybe it somehow either requires more materials or it does damage. And Well, we know they've talked about doing damage to the Vox, so that's potentially a thing.
Right.
The other thing that I think would be interesting is making failure and success public. And by this, I mean, I'm referring mainly to critical success and critical failure. So, like, if you if you're out in the keep and you're working on your Vox and building something and you critically fail, everyone sees your Vox explode.
Yeah.
And so it's literally like you're sitting there, and you're playing, because they've said before the Vox is going to be like a kind of visual, almost entertainment sort of thing with music and all kinds of stuff. So you're sitting there
Right.
doing stuff, and you're like, bah, 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 and you're doing stuff, building a thing, and then all of a sudden it goes, and everyone's like, oh, that sucks. Everyone knows you just screwed up. Like, there's a big plume of smoke, so people from the other side of the keep can see that someone over there just screwed up. But on the flip side, maybe if you critically succeed on building something, there's also like a big fanfare of stuff, and so people are like, oh, what did they just make? So there's kind of a flip side. There's an embarrassment aspect of it when you screw up, but then when you really succeed, people in the keep know you just made something really awesome, and they may be interested in buying it, and may be like, hey, wait, we want to know what you just made.
That would be nice. That'd be cool.
Yeah, and like that, Chris. I mean, it could be visual. It could also be something that goes across the city, as a notification or something. This epic item was just created by Chris, blah, 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 blah. And so it's kind of a duality to it, I guess. Failure sucks, and then everyone knows. But then when you do succeed, it just makes that even sweeter.
Be interesting with the chance of risk, the type of market that becomes in play, I guess, is people not so much giving you mats to make things. If there is that chance of failure, that would suck for them. It's like, here, make this thing for me, and you critically failure on what you were making. Okay, well, I just lost my mats. It becomes more of a, I'm just gonna make all this stuff, and then whatever I get, I sell, and if people want them, they buy them.
Well, I think that's also where it comes into play of the consistent crafting. If you can make a rare tier sword and you've made a dozen of them, I don't think there should be much, if any, RNG in that. So then your guildmates can go, hey, I know you can make the +3 swords. Here's some mats. These are what you need. You said you need to make it. Make me the +3 sword, and then make you the +3 sword, no problem. It's just, I think, when you're trying to either learn new recipes or better recipes, or you're trying to take a chance and get like a higher tier item than what you normally would make, or maybe even some kind of a legendary item or something. It could even be the case that one thing they could potentially do is have a random mechanic of have a mechanic for a random chance to make a legendary item or something. So, like, say you're a high level crafter, and you're now basically in like the in-game crafting, and you're producing a sword, and you're not necessarily trying to make a super amazing sword. You're just making your highest tier weapon that you can make. And then at some point in the creation process, it gives you a notification that there's some kind of a reaction happening. And that's an indicator that goes, okay, you can either do something really awesome, or you might screw up if you try. You can still make the thing. So you still have a choice. You can still go, all right, I can still just make my thing and say, screw it, we're stabilizing it, we're just making my thing.
Yeah.
But you'll know, okay, I could take a chance here, and I either get a legendary or my Vox might blow up in my face. Which one's it going to be? And which one it is may depend on your ability to manage the settings and the minigame of the Vox. So that, it's not necessarily just purely RNG, it's also partly the player's choices in that system. The skill check, essentially. To play that mini game for crafting. Actually, I hadn't thought about that till now, and I actually think that would be kind of cool as a way for them to do the RNG, so that people couldn't just necessarily be like, I want to make a legendary, so I'm going to try all the time, but instead it's like a kind of a random prompt that comes up, And you can always like try to make a cooler item, but I don't know. Maybe there's like a random chance to have the possibility to actually make something truly epic.
Mm-hmm. Having certain mats to use to create something more stable could also be a thing where if you want to try to do something that is harder with more success, you have to have a certain, maybe slightly more rare mat that
Yeah.
is farmable or buyable from another player, to increase your chance of not critically failing.
Yeah. And this is actually and with what Chris just said, the idea I was suggesting of maybe there's like a random chance that it pops up and goes like, oh wait, you might have a chance to make something better than you were trying to make, unless you screw up and mess it up. That could be a way that they could bring in the group crafting they've talked about doing without necessarily having people all have to gather at the same time every time you craft something or try to group craft something. Maybe that pops up and it stops what you're crafting. It just, because we know there's going to be some downtime crafting when you're logged off, where it's just producing things. Maybe it stops it and it's like, all right, your thing is done, but you could try to make it better. And then oh, you have basically it gives you time to get other crafters involved and go, okay, guys, you got to help me because I might be able to make a super amazing weapon. And so then you basically get all your people on to kind of raid the crafting thing and see if y'all can get a cumulative score, a skill check that's high enough to actually succeed in making it. Or at the very least, maybe all the additional people reduce your chance of failure. I don't know. I'm just spitballing, but I do think
Chris doesn't want mini games.
Do what?
Chris does not want mini games.
Yeah. Well, I mean, they I don't know what they've described to me sounds like a mini game. So
to some extent, they call it like being active in your Vox and in the process, and not just click and wait for the bar to go, but being more active, and that is kind of a game.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, they could make it a very simple one where you just have to activate the right thing because something is happening, and not necessarily make it like timed or something. But I don't know. It still sounds like kind of a minigame. You're having to tweak knobs and stuff.
Yeah.
All right. So, did you have any other any other failure type things you wanted to bring up? Because that's about hit the extent of my list.
Not so much in very obvious failure, but there is possibly the failure of building your character wrong, or using the wrong spells or the wrong components and doing things in the wrong order, and maybe more permanent choices that how do you make choosing the wrong Banes and Boons up front still enjoyable if you're not a min-maxer, let's say, where those things might have a little more impact on your performance.
Yeah. I have to say that is a fair consideration because, like, I want a high performing character, but I will sometimes, because I'm a role player, I will often opt for not min maxing if there is something else that I want that kind of fits my RP aesthetic more. I'll kind of opt for that and go, oh, okay, I'm going to do this because it doesn't matter that much if I reduce my abilities a little bit. But from what we've seen so far of the Banes and Boons, they're pretty substantial changes. They're not like, oh, well, it's a 1% damage increase. They're like a 5% damage increase. And while I'm willing to not min-max a character, I'm not going to sacrifice 5% damage for an RP reason. I'd be like, hell no. That's a huge chunk of my damage right there. That's crazy.
Yeah.
So that is potentially a bit of an issue, and I don't think they're going to. I don't think they're going to change a lot of game design considerations based on the interests of our peers. But
unlikely.
The possible issue is then, well, what if someone gets in game, they've chosen something that looked in text like it was really useful, but then they get in game and they find out the ability that's associated with it sucks. It doesn't work right. It's bugged
Right.
out. It's been nerfed at some point since the last guide they read, and now they took a thing to get like 5% better impact from it, and they never use that ability because it sucks. That's part of why I think that there is going to have to be some limited degree of or method for rebuilding your character.
Right.
For some reason, the words just evaded me right now. It's just
Like a respec
yeah,
or
respec. Thank you. For some reason, the word was just like whoosh. I do think there's going to have to be some limited degree of respec. Like even if it's to the point where it's like, okay, you have one respec when you make your character, and that's it.
Mhm.
Unless you buy an expansion or something, and we create expansions because then they tend to rebalance abilities and stuff. So then again, I think it's possibly fair. But respecs and how those would work are very confusing given the horizontal nature of the game and things like that. A respec may be limited to Banes and Boons or a bit, your initial ability scores, or because obviously you can't redo all your abilities. I mean, you gain those over
right.
time through use, so that would be weird. Really, the main thing it seemed that those seem like the only things you would ever really try to respec are like your base stats that you started with, and your Banes and Boons, or maybe even just your Banes and Boons.
Right. Yeah, there has to be some way to make a different choice with those, just in case. 'Cause everyone, well, most people will probably pick one that isn't quite as useful as they had hoped, and that's just going to suck if that's a permanent choice forever.
Yeah, well, and especially when the game first comes out, and
Yeah.
there'll certainly be guides from those of us who have been in the game and been testing it and stuff, but there'll be changes when the game first comes out that we can't, you know, necessarily account for and all that stuff. And there's always an ability in an MMO, or usually several, that look way cooler than they actually are.
Hmm.
It's like, wow, that is amazing, and then you go to use it, and like, wow, that does not seem to do what I thought it did at all. Um, it looked like it would do a lot of damage, but I don't feel like I'm doing a lot of damage with this.
Yeah. But aside from that, I think we've covered most of the realms of failure in a
Yep.
PvP environment.
Yeah, there were some different ideas that we talked about that I think would be cool. I would like to see in game. Uh, one of the things I really do want to see is like legacy of locations and stuff in the game. They've never talked about it, but I've talked about it a few times. Like having markers on maps or of big battles that took place there, or like a plaque within a keep that documents the history of the keep and who's owned it and the battles that have taken place there to some degree, and or at least the biggest ones and stuff like that. It'd be cool stuff.
Yeah.
Anyway, I think we have, as you said, pretty much covered everything. So that's failure, and hopefully some ways that they can implement things in the game that help keep it fun regardless of failure. I think ultimately the core component of this is the game's combat fun. If the game's combat is not fun, nothing they do is gonna about other stuff is gonna
Basically,
trick
yeah.
us for very long. Um, so that's even when you're dying, if as long as the game's combat is fun, it's gonna hold you on for a while, unless you do nothing but die. If you suck at the game or your realm is completely super underpowered, then that's going to be a problem. But nevertheless, I think we've covered quite a bit. Thanks everybody for coming and hanging out with us. If you're watching the recording, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and like and all that kind of stuff. And we will be back in 2 weeks for another episode of the Vodcast. Hopefully, we will have an interview this time. I know I've said
Yeah.
that the last two times.
It's
We at least
been hard.
we at least have indication that
Yeah.
this next episode we will probably be able to manage that. So we'll see. Until then, have a good week, or 2 weeks rather.